2 years ago, during my sophomore year of college. It was the first semester, and right in the middle of it, I had a pretty tough schedule and always had tons of homework to do. One night, I went to the study area in my dorm building, which was in the basement. I started my homework at like 7 p.m. and ended up staying there until almost 1 o'clock in the morning. I was able to finish all of my homework, but my roommate was asleep in our room, and I was starving. There was a McDonald's right near campus, but it closed at midnight. I looked at my phone to see what was open, and I saw that there was a 24-hour McDonald's in the next city over, about a 10-minute drive away. I left the dorm and got into my car to drive there. I was so hungry and desperately wanted any kind of food to eat. When I got there, I pulled into the drive-thru and ordered a few burgers. After I got them, I just parked in the parking lot to eat them right there. I was so hungry that I couldn't wait. Plus, I couldn't go back to my dorm and eat them in my room because my roommate was sleeping, and I didn't want to wake him up. It was just what I needed, and it really hit the spot. Right in the middle of my eating, though, I noticed that a car pulled into the parking lot and then parked right next to me. It looked to be a dark gray SUV. I also drove an SUV, but a smaller one. Of course, it's always strange when a car parks next to you in a parking lot that only has like 3 cars total in it. I couldn't see into the windows when I looked because there was a shirt draped over the passenger's side window from the inside. I just kept eating and honestly didn't think much of it at all. I heard a door from their car open and shut, and I figured they had gotten out to go inside. About 2 minutes later, I happened to glance up from my phone, where I had been scrolling through Snapchat, and I noticed something. There was some guy looking into the back window of my car. It startled me, and my heart started beating really fast. I couldn't make out many details about the guy because of how dark it was. The guy then pressed his hands and face up against the window and knocked on it with one of his hands. I had no idea what this guy was doing. Then he tried opening the swinging back door of my car. I was really creeped out now. My engine was still running, thankfully, and the doors were locked. The guy started going around to my front driver's door, and that's when I wasted no time. I put my car into reverse and pulled out. When I did, I saw the guy starting to sprint over to his car. I sped up and got out of the parking lot as quickly as I could, then back onto the streets. I watched in my rearview mirror as the car started up and pulled out behind me. I tried to stay calm, but before long, the guy was on the road and right on my tail. It was basically just us on the quiet roads, and nobody else was really out there at all. I drove down street after street, with the car right behind me, copying every move that I made. He remained right on my tail, probably within 10 or 20 feet of my car the entire time. I didn't want to speed or do anything crazy, but at the same time, I really didn't know what to do. I couldn't just drive back to my dorm, or else the guy would know where I lived. I got within maybe a mile of campus and then basically just started taking random turns. The car did each and every one of them with me. This went on in random neighborhoods and streets just off campus for a good 10 minutes, I would say. Then, I pulled onto a street where a police car happened to be driving down. As I approached the police car, I saw the guy behind me turn off onto another street and drive away. I thought about flagging down the police, but now that the guy was gone, I decided to just drive home. I kept going and very carefully drove back to campus. After that, I made it back to my dorm safely and went to bed. Luckily, I never saw the man or his car again. I've always wondered, though, what was he doing? A few months ago, I had a really creepy experience at Home Depot. I don't normally shop there. In fact, it had been almost a year since my last visit. Usually, I stick to stores like Target, Walmart, or HomeGoods. But on this particular day, I was on the hunt for a new rug and a few other household items, like light bulbs. I had already checked other stores but hadn't had any luck finding what I needed, so I decided to give Home Depot a try. It was around 8 p.m. when I arrived, and it was already dark outside. Before heading to Home Depot, I had been running errands at other stores, so by the time I got there, things were pretty quiet. The store, as you know, is massive, and even though there were a few employees and some shoppers around, it felt mostly empty. I decided not to ask an employee for help and figured I could look around and find what I needed on my own. While I wasn't familiar with the store's layout, I was confident I could navigate it. I began wandering through the aisles, making my way toward the back of the store to check out the rugs. As I browsed through the selection of rugs, a man approached me. At first, I didn't think anything of it. He had dark hair, wore jeans, and a gray jacket. I assumed he might be an employee because he was moving closer to me as I was browsing, but after glancing at him, I realized he wasn't. I brushed it off, figuring he was just another customer looking around the same area. After a few minutes, I left the rug section to find the light bulbs. To my surprise, the man followed me. He was walking right behind me the entire time, about 5 feet back. It felt strange, but I still tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe he happened to be heading in the same direction. I found the light bulb aisle, and sure enough, the man was there too. He stopped right next to me, pretending to browse, but it felt too deliberate. There was no way it was just a coincidence anymore. At that point, I started feeling uncomfortable. To test things, I walked away and headed to another aisle. When I did, the man followed me again. This time, it wasn't just a coincidence, he was definitely following me. I couldn't believe it was actually happening. I went down a random aisle, hoping to shake him off, but he came down the same aisle, staying just a few feet behind. That's when I had enough. I stopped abruptly, turned around, and faced him. He stopped too, looking startled, almost as if he hadn't expected me to confront him. With a surprised expression, he just stared at me. I asked, "Why are you following me around the store?" The man denied it completely, with a straight face. He said, "I'm just trying to shop," and shook his head like I was the one acting strangely. Then, he picked up a random item from the shelf, pretending to be interested in it. I was furious, but I didn't want to make a scene. So, I just walked away, leaving him there in the aisle. Even though he stayed put after our confrontation, I knew for sure that he had been following me. I didn't know why, maybe he thought it was funny or he was trying to annoy me. Whatever it was, I was just glad he had finally stopped. After that, I continued looking around the store for a few more minutes, but I wasn't there much longer. I didn't see him again, and I had no idea where he went. At that point, I didn't really care. I just wanted to finish up and leave. I ended up buying a few small items, although I didn't get the rug I had originally come for. Once I checked out, I headed outside to the parking lot. It was dark and mostly empty, with only a few cars scattered around. I was about halfway to my car when something made me glance back. I'm not sure why, I didn't hear footsteps or anything, but it must have been instincts kicking in. When I turned around, there he was. The same man was walking towards me in the dark parking lot, about 50 feet away. My heart started racing. I didn't want to stick around to see what he was planning. I quickly unlocked my car and practically sprinted to it. I didn't even bother to look back again, because I didn't want to know if he was running towards me. As fast as I could, I got inside my car, locked the doors, and put it in drive. Luckily, no one was parked in front of me, so I was able to peel away without any issues. I didn't see him as I drove off, and I'm not sure if he got any closer or stopped once I reached my car. Either way, I wasn't sticking around to find out. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I made sure I wasn't being followed. Once I was certain, I headed straight home, my mind still racing from the encounter. Looking back, I have no idea who that man was or what he wanted. It was so obvious that he had been following me around the store, but for what reason? I'll probably never know. Since then, I haven't been back to Home Depot, and honestly, I'm not in any rush to go there again. This happened a few years back. My name is Pablo, and at the time, I was planning a vacation with my girlfriend, Allison, to the West Coast. We had both been looking forward to getting away from our daily routines, exploring new cities, and just having a break. Before leaving, we spent quite a while searching online, trying to find the best place to stay that would fit within our budget. We started by checking out hotels, but nothing really caught our eye. After a few failed attempts at finding a good deal, Allison suggested that we try looking at Airbnb properties in the area. I agreed, and before long, we found a few places that seemed perfect. One, in particular, stood out from the rest. It was small but cozy, modern, and located in what looked like a really nice neighborhood. After some back and forth, we both agreed that it was the best option. Fast forward a couple of weeks, and we had finally arrived at the Airbnb. When we pulled up, it looked exactly like the pictures online, clean, modern, and tucked into a quiet suburban neighborhood. The house was new, with a small but perfectly maintained yard. It felt like the ideal spot for a relaxing vacation. The inside was just as nice as the outside. It was a small house, with only one bedroom, 2 bathrooms, a living room, a dining room, and a kitchen, but it had everything we needed for our stay. The first day flew by. We didn't spend much time in the house at all, as we were too busy exploring nearby cities and trying out local restaurants. Everything was going smoothly, and we both felt like we had made the right choice by picking this Airbnb. However, things took a strange turn on the second night. It was late, probably close to midnight, and Allison and I were getting ready for bed after another long day of sightseeing. I was in the bathroom, brushing my teeth, when I heard a noise coming from down the hallway. At first, I thought it was Allison, but about 10 seconds later, I walked into the bedroom to find her already lying in bed. I asked her, "Did you just come down the hall?" She looked at me, confused, and said, "No, I've been in bed the whole time." That's when I started to feel a bit uneasy. I brushed off the feeling, thinking that maybe it was just the house settling or some noise from outside. I tried to convince myself there was a perfectly logical explanation. After all, the neighborhood seemed safe, and the house itself felt secure. I climbed into bed, closed my eyes, and eventually drifted off to sleep. But at some point in the middle of the night, I woke up. I sat up in bed, disoriented and unsure of what had woken me. It was around 4 a.m., and the room was dark. I looked over, and Allison was still fast asleep beside me. For a few moments, everything was quiet, but then I heard it, a faint noise, coming from what sounded like the kitchen. It was the distinct sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, as if someone was walking around in the house. My heart started racing. I sat up, straining to hear, but the footsteps stopped just as quickly as they had started. I wasn't sure what to do. Was someone really inside the house, or was I just imagining things? For a few minutes, I stayed frozen in bed, convincing myself that it was nothing, just paranoia, nothing to worry about. Still, to be on the safe side, I decided to check things out. I got out of bed and turned on the light in the bedroom. Slowly, I made my way to the hallway and flicked on the light there too. The house was silent now. I cautiously stepped into the living room and turned on the lights, scanning the room. Everything looked normal. I went from room to room, checking each one thoroughly, but found nothing unusual. No sign of anyone, no open doors or windows, nothing. Feeling somewhat reassured, I returned to the bedroom, climbed back into bed, and eventually fell asleep again. The next day, everything went on as usual. We spent most of the day out, enjoying the vacation, and by evening, the strange events from the night before were pushed to the back of my mind. But then, on the third night, something similar happened. This time, it wasn't me who woke up first, it was Allison. She shook me awake in the middle of the night, whispering that she had heard something in the house. Groggy and confused, I got out of bed again. This time, I didn't turn on the lights. I quietly crept into the hallway, squinting into the darkness, expecting the same outcome as the night before, nothing. But as I stood there, trying to listen, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. At the far end of the dining room, I caught sight of a closet door closing. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I didn't see anyone, but I was certain the door had just moved. In the dim light, I thought I might have seen part of someone's arm as the door shut, but it was too dark to be sure. My mind raced. Someone was in the house, hiding. I stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Just then, Allison came out of the bedroom, walking toward me. I quickly told her to get back inside and locked the bedroom door behind us. We both sat on the bed, and she said, "We need to call the police." I agreed. We called the local authorities, and they told us that officers would arrive within 15 minutes. As we sat there, waiting for the police, we suddenly heard footsteps again. This time, they were closer, slow, deliberate steps, moving down the hallway, right toward our bedroom door. My heart was pounding in my chest. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. I could feel the tension in the air as we sat there in silence, waiting. I couldn't take it anymore. I shouted through the door, "We've called the police. They're on their way." But there was no response, no sound of footsteps walking away, no movement at all. The silence was deafening. We sat there for what felt like hours, though it was probably only a few minutes. Finally, we heard the sound of sirens approaching the house. At the same moment, we heard footsteps again. This time moving quickly through the house. Whoever had been outside our door was now on the move. By the time the police arrived and entered the house, the intruder was gone. The front door had been left unlocked, a sign that whoever was in the house had left in a hurry. The police conducted a thorough search of the house and the surrounding property, but they couldn't find anyone. No signs of forced entry, no clues as to who the intruder was or how long they had been inside. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. Needless to say, we didn't stay another night in that Airbnb. We packed our bags and left first thing in the morning, cutting our vacation short. To this day, we still don't know who was in that house with us or what they wanted. I'm just thankful that we weren't harmed. Looking back, the whole experience feels surreal, like something out of a horror movie. It's a chilling reminder that no matter how safe a place may seem, danger can always be lurking just around the corner. We never did return to that Airbnb, and now, whenever we book a place to stay, we make sure to triple-check every lock and window before going to bed. About 5 years ago, I found myself working as a high school janitor, a job that I held for a little over 6 months. It was an interesting experience, to say the least, and one that left me with a story I'll never forget. The incident I'm about to share occurred in either April or May during my overnight shift, which ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The high school I worked at was somewhat small, and typically when I started my shift, the building was deserted. Occasionally, a few early risers would trickle in as my shift ended, but for the most part, I enjoyed the eerie solitude. There was something both comforting and unsettling about being alone in a school at night. The empty hallways were often dimly lit, and the silence was punctuated only by the sounds of my cleaning equipment. On this particular night, shortly after I started my shift, around 11:30 p.m., I was in the west hallways, diligently mopping the floors. The lights were motion sensing, so aside from the area I was working in, most of the school was shrouded in darkness. As I mopped, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was a strange sensation, but I brushed it off, attributing it to my active imagination. Suddenly, I heard a sound that made me freeze, the unmistakable bounce of a basketball echoing from inside the gym. At first, I thought nothing of it. After all, I had just been cleaning. But then reality hit me hard. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost midnight. Nobody was supposed to be there. The basketball season had ended about a month ago, and I was alone in the building. Intrigued and a bit uneasy, I stopped mopping and listened carefully. The bouncing noise continued for a brief moment before fading away into silence. I left my mop behind and decided to investigate. The gym was just down a long, narrow hallway, separated by the locker rooms. As I walked toward the gym, the air felt charged with anticipation. When I reached the door, I opened it, and the bright lights of the gym illuminated the space. I found a basketball sitting against the wall, but there was no one in sight. It was unsettling. Someone had clearly been there recently, but where had they gone? I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" My voice echoed off the walls, but there was only silence in response. Feeling a little on edge, I checked the nearby coaches' offices, but all their lights were off, and the doors were shut tight. I stepped outside to glance into the parking lot, and it was completely empty, save for my car sitting quietly. With my unease growing, I returned to my mop and resumed my work. As I started mopping again, something caught my eye. I looked down the long hallway and noticed movement at the far end, a figure ducking into a room. My heart raced as I realized it was my janitor's closet. "What are you doing in there?" I yelled, trying to sound assertive but feeling a wave of panic wash over me. My voice echoed again, but there was no response. I waited a few moments, standing at a distance of about 150 feet from the door, but the person inside wasn't coming out. After several minutes of tension-filled silence, I knew I had to confront whoever was in my closet. Each step I took down the hallway felt like a mile, and I felt a growing sense of dread. I could have just called the police, but something compelled me to handle it myself. As I reached the janitor's closet door, a terrible feeling settled in my stomach. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to muster the courage to open it. I knew I should be cautious. The thought of a stranger being in my workspace was unnerving. But there was a part of me that felt I had to know what was going on. Finally, I steeled myself and opened the door. The room was mostly dark, with my cleaning supplies and tools in their usual places. I didn't see anyone inside at first, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of relief. But then, less than a second after opening the door, something moved in the shadows. A large wooden pole came swinging toward my head. Instinctively, I ducked, narrowly avoiding the impact. My heart raced as adrenaline surged through my veins. I backed out, slamming the door shut and sprinting away from the scene, my mind racing with confusion and fear. I didn't stop running until I was safely outside the building, and only then did I gather my thoughts enough to call the police. I dialed 911, my hands shaking as I explained the situation to the operator. It felt surreal, almost like a scene from a horror movie. Within about 2 minutes, the police arrived, and I watched as they entered the school. I paced nervously outside, my heart still pounding from the encounter. After a few minutes that felt like an eternity, the officers came out with a man in custody. He was a creepy-looking dude, scruffy and disheveled, and I had no idea when or how he had gotten into the school. He was arrested right there on the spot, but the questions swirling in my mind remained unanswered. Why had he tried to attack me? What were his intentions? The police searched the entire school and surrounding area, but they didn't find any more evidence of the man's presence. They informed me that he was likely just looking for a place to hide or something sinister, and that thought alone sent chills down my spine. That single encounter was enough to rattle me to my core, and I knew I couldn't continue working there any longer. I put in my resignation shortly after that night. The experience had left me on edge, and I didn't want to take any more chances. I'd always thought of myself as a brave person, but that night shattered my sense of safety. To this day, I can still remember the feeling of dread that washed over me as I stood in front of that janitor's closet door. It was a stark reminder of how quickly things can turn from mundane to terrifying. I've since found other work, but that experience serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder to always trust your instincts, especially in unfamiliar situations. I was back home from school on a chilly autumn afternoon and happened to be home alone for the evening. Both of my parents were out doing their usual weekend shopping run, and my younger sister was spending the night at her friend's house. The house was quiet, almost eerily so, with only the sound of my pen scratching paper as I tried to finish up my homework. I had a lot to get done, and the silence made me hyper-aware of every small noise in the house. To break up the stillness, I had my phone on the desk with some music playing softly in the background. Every now and then, I'd take a break, reaching for my phone to snap a picture of my progress or just change the song. It was during one of these moments, as I mindlessly swiped through Snapchat, that I accidentally opened the Snap Map. I never really use it, but for some reason, today my eyes lingered on the screen. That's when I saw something odd. According to the Snap Map, my friend Abby was right outside my house. I froze for a second, staring at the little bitmoji of Abby hovering over my house. I hadn't heard a knock on the door or seen anyone walk by, which was strange considering how quiet everything was. Abby was a classmate of mine. We were friendly, sure, but not close enough that she'd just show up unannounced. In fact, I don't think we'd ever hung out outside of school. She lived in the same city, but in a neighborhood across town, nowhere near my place. My fingers hesitated over the phone. Why would Abby be here? Curiosity got the better of me, so I decided to send her a quick snap. I took a photo of my desk, typed out a message, "Hey, what are you doing at my house?" and hit send. Before I could even set my phone back down, I saw that she'd opened the snap, the little open notification flashing up at the bottom of the screen. I waited, expecting a reply, maybe a joke or an explanation, but nothing. The notification remained, but no response came. That was the first moment I felt a flicker of unease. I put my phone down and stood up, walking over to the window that faced the front yard. I pulled the curtain back, expecting to see Abby standing there, maybe waving awkwardly from the driveway. But when I looked, the street outside was completely empty. The trees were swaying gently in the breeze, and the only thing moving was a few scattered leaves, blowing lazily across the pavement. I couldn't even hear the hum of a car engine, just silence. The unease deepened. I glanced back down at my phone, where the Snap Map still showed Abby's location, right outside. Was she playing some kind of prank? Was she hiding nearby, waiting for me to come out? The thought made me smile, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. Something felt off. I walked out of my room and into the hallway, the floor creaking softly under my feet. As I stepped into the living room, the sense of being watched crept in. The kind of feeling you get when someone's eyes are on you, but you can't quite see them. I stood still, straining to listen. The house was old, and it wasn't unusual to hear little noises, but I swore I could hear movement, faint, like the sound of someone stepping carefully on the gravel behind the house. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Slowly, I made my way to the back door, which led out to the yard. There wasn't a clear view from where I was standing, so I had to get closer. My heart was starting to beat faster now, and every sound seemed louder in the growing stillness. I reached the door and cautiously peered outside. Nothing. The backyard was empty, the same as always, just the old fence, the tree swaying in the wind, and the garden that my mom worked on during the weekends. But something still didn't sit right. I stepped outside, the cold air biting at my skin as I crossed the threshold. "Abby?" I called out, but my voice seemed to die in the breeze. No response. I circled the yard, my eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. But I saw no sign of her or anyone else. Feeling more confused than ever, I went back inside and shut the door behind me, locking it for good measure. I glanced down at my phone again. This time, Abby's location had shifted. She was a few blocks away now, as if she just left. My heart raced. It seemed innocent enough, but why would she have been here without telling me? Something felt wrong. I needed answers, so I decided to call her. I dialed her number and waited, each ring echoing in the silence of the living room. But she didn't pick up. After a few rings, it went straight to voicemail. Now I was getting really nervous. The next day, when I got to school, I was determined to talk to her and figure out what was going on. I knew roughly where her locker was, so before class, I made my way over. Abby was chatting with some friends when I approached. I greeted her casually, but inside, my nerves were buzzing. "Hey, Abby," I said, trying to sound as normal as possible. "What were you doing at my house yesterday?" She gave me a confused look. "At your house?" "What do you mean?" she asked. I explained what I'd seen on the Snap map, how it showed her standing right outside my house. As I spoke, her confusion deepened. She shook her head, frowning. "I wasn't at your house yesterday," she said firmly. "I haven't even been near your neighborhood." My stomach dropped. I pulled out my phone and showed her the map from the day before. Her eyes widened. "That's so weird," she muttered. Then she glanced at me, her face pale. "I lost my phone yesterday. I think someone stole it." A chill ran down my spine. The realization hit me hard. Whoever had been outside my house hadn't been Abby, it was someone else. Someone with her phone. Someone who had been standing outside, watching my house, possibly even watching me. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Suddenly, the strange silence, the sounds I'd heard in the backyard, all made sense. I quickly pulled out my phone again to check the Snap map, but this time, Abby's location was turned off. Whoever had her phone was no longer broadcasting their movements. That afternoon, when I got home, I told my parents everything. We double-checked the locks on all the doors and windows, and for the next few days, we kept a close watch on the house. Thankfully, we never saw anyone lurking around. But the uneasiness lingered. To this day, I still wonder who that person was, and what they were planning to do. After a long day at work, I came home and had a relaxing night, just like any other. I watched some TV, scrolled through my phone, and eventually went to bed. The next morning, I woke up and, like usual, the first thing I did was check my phone. I immediately noticed several missed calls from an unfamiliar number. They had all come in between 3 o'clock and 4 a.m. There must have been at least 7 or 8 calls. Oddly, there were no voicemails left. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was a wrong number or some kind of telemarketer. I brushed it off and went about my day. When I got home that evening, I had completely forgotten about the calls. It wasn't until nearly midnight, while I was watching TV and enjoying the fact that I didn't have work the next day, that my phone started vibrating again. I picked it up and saw that the same unknown number was calling me. Remembering the strange calls from the previous night, I was hesitant, but decided to answer, hoping to clear up whatever confusion had caused this. I pressed the green button and said, "Hello?" There was no immediate response, just static and some faint movement on the other end. I said hello again, this time louder, but still nothing. I figured it must be a butt dial, or maybe they had the wrong number, so I politely said, "I think you might have the wrong person." But again, no response. Feeling curious, I put the phone on speaker and turned the volume up. As I listened closely, I could hear breathing. It was faint, but unmistakable. It also sounded like whoever was on the other end was in a car, with the distant hum of the road in the background. I sat there for several minutes, growing more confused and a bit unsettled, before deciding it was time to hang up. Just as I was about to press the button to end the call, I heard it. A voice, quiet and eerie, whispered through the speaker, "I'm here." A chill ran down my spine. Before I could even process what I had just heard, the line went dead. My heart started to race as I sat there in the eerie silence, trying to make sense of it all. Then, I heard it, the sound of a car door slamming shut outside. I jumped up, rushed to turn off the TV, and peered out the window. It was dark, but I could make out the silhouette of a man walking up my driveway, straight toward my front door. My breath caught in my throat as I watched him approach. He knocked softly, then tried the doorknob. Panic surged through me. I wasn't expecting anyone, and this man's sudden appearance, combined with the creepy phone call, was enough to terrify me. I grabbed my phone and hovered over the dial screen, ready to call the police. I stayed quiet, not making a sound, hoping that whoever it was would just leave. Minutes passed, but I didn't hear anything. I waited, frozen in place, unsure if he was still there or had walked away. I couldn't see the front door from where I was sitting, and I was too afraid to move closer. After what felt like an eternity, I finally worked up the courage to creep towards the window that overlooked the door. Peeking out, I expected to see him still standing there, but to my relief, no one was there. He was gone. Even though he had left, I was still rattled. I checked every window and locked every door before finally retreating to my bedroom, where I spent the rest of the night wide awake, listening for any sound. The next morning, I checked my phone again. No more calls, and no sign of anyone trying to break in. Out of sheer curiosity, I tried calling the number back, but this time I got a recording telling me the number was no longer in service. It was as if the number, and the man, had simply disappeared into the night.